Before we get into the substance of today's session, I'd like to take care of a couple of house cleaning details. First is to ask everybody to pick up an evaluation form and please fill it out and give it to one of our wonderful volunteers at the end of the session. The second is to please silence your cell phones. But if you would like to tweet about this event as it's going on, you can do so at hashtag VABook2015. And I say that as if I have any idea what I just said. On behalf of the Virginia Foundation for the Humanities, the sponsor for the Virginia Festival of the Book, I'd like to welcome you to this program. My name is Josh Wheeler, and I am the director of the Thomas Jefferson Center for the Protection of Free Expression, the sponsor of today's event. This is the 21st, I believe, 21st Virginia Festival of the Book. This is also the 25th anniversary of the Thomas Jefferson Center. And it is a source of great pride to us at the Thomas Jefferson Center that we have been involved in every one of the 21 editions of the Virginia Festival of the Book. We believe that one of the best ways to combat censorship and to protect free expression is simply to remind people of the tremendous societal benefits that we receive when we have a society in which people, artists, authors can explore any idea, subject, or theme. And so what better way to celebrate and to protect free expression than the Virginia Festival of the Book? This is an incredible festival. It is done mostly at no charge, but that doesn't mean it doesn't cost money to perform. And if you agree and you feel that this is something that is worth supporting, I hope you'll turn to vabook.org and after the program and support the Virginia Festival of the Book. If you also would like to learn more about the Thomas Jefferson Center, you can do so by visiting our website at tjcenter.org. The title of this session is Twisted, the Competitive World of Competition and Crochet. No, that's not right. Oh, I brought the wrong notes.
You had us worried.
No. Today's session does have a First Amendment free speech aspect to it. And the question is, an issue that we've explored and is talked about very much, very timely, when money speaks, who will be heard? And of course, this is a discussion about the recent Supreme Court decisions regarding limits on campaign finance, limits on using money in election campaigns. To discuss this topic, we could not have asked for or received two more qualified participants. Ron Collins is an old friend of the Thomas Jefferson Center. He is and by old I just mean in age. He is the
I'm under 70.
No, a longtime friend of the Thomas Jefferson Center, and in fact, also this festival. I think this is the fourth time Ron has come down to participate in a panel that we have sponsored. He is a Harold S. Scheffelman Scholar at University of Washington School of Law. He received his law degree from Loyola Law School in Los Angeles, where he served on the Law Review, and his bachelor's degree from the University of California at Santa Barbara. After working with the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles and the Legal Aid Society of Orange County, Ron went on to be a teaching fellow at Stanford Law School and then has taught at a number of leading law schools across the country. What I'd like to emphasize, both of these gentlemen, they're just too many accomplishments to list them all. What I'd like to focus on with Ron is that he is just an incredible scholar and a prolific author. Here's just a partial listing of some of the books he has authored, co-authored, edited. The Fundamental Homes, a Free Speech Chronicle and Reader. We Must Not Be Afraid to Be Free, Stories About Free Speech in America. The Death of Discourse. The Trials of Lenny Bruce. The Fundamental Hugo Black, a Free Speech Chronicle. And last year, or 2013, he published 3 books, Nuanced Absolutism, Floyd Abrams and the First Amendment, followed by Mania, the story of the outraged and outrageous lives that launched a generation, and also On Dissent, Its Meaning in America. We're here today to talk about one of his more recent books, When Money Speaks, The McCutcheon Decision, Campaign Finance Laws and the First Amendment. Somehow, Ron also finds time to teach, and in 2012, He received the Outstanding Faculty Award from the editors of the Washington Law Review, so he must be doing something right in the classroom. And he also writes a weekly First Amendment news column for the Concurring Opinions blog. Please join me in welcoming Ron Collins here. Jamie Raskin, and that's not a typo, that's how you spell his name, but he goes by Jamie. Just wanted to make sure that there was no confusion about that. Graduated magna cum laude from Harvard College and Harvard Law School. Apparently, like Ron, they couldn't get into the University of Virginia Law School. He was also editor of the Harvard Law Review. Jamie is a professor of constitutional law at American University's Washington College of Law and a state senator in Maryland, where he's a majority whip of the senator. Senator Raskin has led successful efforts to pass the marriage equality repeal, the death penalty.
No.
Sorry?
Just marriage equality.
Oh, sorry, repeal. Oh, I jumped ahead.
Let's be careful about that.
Sorry, let me try that again. Led the successful effort to pass the marriage equality bill, repeal the death penalty, and ban assault weapons in the state of Maryland. Are we applauding his achievements or the fact I got it right? He is also a senior fellow at the People for the American Way, where he advises on matters of constitutional justice, freedom, and political democracy. He has written dozens of essays and law review articles and several books, including the 2003 Washington Post bestseller, Overruling Democracy, The Supreme Court versus the American People, and We the Students, which analyzes Supreme Court decisions affecting American students. He has appeared on national television outlets, including The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, The Ed Show, and Hannity, and is a regular contributor to The Nation and The Huffington Post. Please join me in welcoming Jamie Raskin. Thank you. My plan today is to, I'm officially the moderator, but I have discovered in doing these things over time that you folks often have better questions, not often, do have better questions than I have. And so what I'd like to do is get things going, but I am going to open this up to questions very early and just keep the conversation going. So if you have questions, raise your hand when I ask for them, and wait, though, until we get somebody with a microphone to get to you so that the people at home will be able to hear this. This is, by the way, being recorded for Charlottesville Channel 10, which is a great service, our community access channel, and also for C-SPAN's Book TV. And we're very grateful to have them both here today. I'd like to start things off with just a general question to sort of make sure we're all on the same page here. The term Citizens United has really become part of the American lexicon in the last few years. And I'd like to ask you, Jamie, if you could just tell us what exactly is Citizens United?
Great. First, let me thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I had to come to this festival because my sister Erica published a novel this year called Close, and she's here, so I had to come and watch her talk. And so I figured I'd get the free ride down to come and talk about Ron's book, too. So Citizens United was a watershed decision in 2010, which toppled, to my mind, 2 centuries of understanding of what a corporation is. If you go back to the Supreme Court's decision in 1819 in the Dartmouth College case, Chief Justice John Marshall said the corporation is an artificial entity, invisible, intangible, existing only in contemplation of law and possessing only those rights conferred upon it by the Charter of Creation. And that set an understanding that lasted right up until 2010 in Citizens United. The theory was that a corporation is a subordinate economic entity that could be regulated by the people. It could do the people's business. It was a fantastic vehicle of wealth accumulation and investment and activity. But as Justice White put it in 1978 in a case called First National Bank of Boston versus Bellotti, he said, the state need not permit its own creature to consume it. And that was at a point when there was an assertion that corporations had political free spending rights. In 2010, the 5-justice conservative majority on the Roberts Court reached out to ask a question that had not been posed to it in Citizens United. It was really a rather simple statutory question that had come to the court, which is, under the McCain-Feingold Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, does a pay-per-view movie, and there was this anti-Hillary Clinton movie made by the Citizens United group, does that constitute a TV ad within the meaning of the McCain-Feingold legislation? All they had to say in order to have the conservative group win was no, that was not what was contemplated in terms of regulating these TV ads. But the conservative majority in the court wanted to go much further, so they ordered the parties to go back and to rebrief and re-argue a completely new question, which was essentially, do corporations have the First Amendment political free speech rights of the people? And can they spend on an unlimited basis in our politics? And what do you know? After getting all of the arguments back in the brief back, they decided that yes, indeed, that corporations are just, quote, as Justice Kennedy put it, an association of citizens, just like you and me. Just like getting together. And so the CEOs have the power to take whatever they want out of the corporate treasury to spend in politics. Now understand, before Citizens United, the corporate voice, as Justice Stevens put it, was hardly missing from our politics, because corporate executives could spend all of their money that they wanted, and the CEOs can spend all of their money, and in fact the corporations could create political action committees, but those PACs had to actually get individual contributions from real human beings. So for example, in the 2008 cycle, ExxonMobil had a PAC which raised around $1 million, which is not chump change, which they were able to put into campaigns across the country. But if Citizens United had been in place in 2008, the CEO of ExxonMobil could have reached into the corporate treasury and taken out essentially whatever he wanted. The company had $87 billion in corporate profits during that cycle. So if they had taken out a modest 10% of just their profits, they could have spent $8.7 billion, which was more than it was spent by the Obama campaign, the McCain campaign, and every federal candidate for office in the country that year. That's 10% of the profits of one Fortune 500 company. And the court declared that this is what the Constitution means, that corporations can spend whatever they want. And with predictable results, in the very next election cycle in 2010, when the major questions of the campaign should have been the BP oil spill, which destroyed an entire ecosystem in the Gulf of Mexico, or the collapsing coal mines of the Massey Corporation in West Virginia, or the $1 trillion meltdown of the mortgage industry, which destroyed lots of people's jobs, homes, retirement, and so on. When that should have been the issue, instead, the infusion of corporate money made the question in the 2010 congressional campaigns corporate deregulation and how important it is to deregulate business in America. And we saw the triumph of the Tea Party, and since then we have seen ever-increasing spending on the super PACs, on dark money, rivers flowing in through 501c4 and c6 organizations because of the Citizens United opinion, which was, again, 5-4, deeply divided, and continuing huge majorities of the American people reject this proposition that corporations should be treated like citizens, like people. So there continues to be majority support for a constitutional amendment. The Democrats brought it up. It was on a party line vote. The constitutional amendment would have reversed Citizens United and the governing dogmas of the time, which are that money is speech and corporations are people. And now we're trying to work out other statutory ways to fight back. But to me, this is the big question of our time. Are we going to be able to find a way to reclaim democratic momentum, all of the momentum we had from the civilizing movements of the last century, the civil rights movement, the labor movement, the women's movement, the gay lesbian movement, or are we going to allow corporations to govern? And I'm speaking as someone who wants corporations to profit, to prosper, to thrive, but I don't want them to govern. That belongs to the people under our Constitution.
Ron, was there anything there you'd like to respond to specifically?
I concur in part and dissent in part. First of all, thank you, Josh, and thanks to the Thomas Jefferson Center for making this event possible, and thank you for all the wonderful First Amendment work You do sometimes at the risk of being criticized, but for those of us in the community, we very much value the contribution that the center has made.
Thank you.
The reason I have to concur in part and dissent in part with what Jamie has said is because it's a very complicated issue. When Money Speaks, which is a book I co-authored with my co-author and friend, longtime friend, David Scover, we made a concerted effort, and I'll let others decide, to be absolutely balanced. Not balanced in the Fox News sense, but balanced in the definition, the dictionary definition sense. And we tried to really present both sides as best we could. So if you look through and you try to discern exactly what our position is, good luck. And the reason we did that is because this is a very complicated issue. It is one that liberals, the world is really not divided liberal-conservative. I take great pride in being formally affiliated with the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles and working on many of the causes that Jamie has so well continued to defend in his role as a member of the state legislature and as an academic. I dare say that there's probably very few things that we disagree on, and I want to talk about more about his possible bid for a congressional seat, because that's still on, right? Last I heard in the Washington Post, you were serious. Your wife had approved it, your children approved it, and friends were encouraging you. So is that still on the table?
I have won the family primary, yes.
Okay. He is in our district, so I definitely have some questions I'd like to ask. But I must say that as someone who's done work for the Legal Aid Foundation, the American Civil Liberties Unions, and a lot of other groups, I take a back seat to no one when it comes to being liberal. I do not think our current president is liberal. By my standards, he's far too centrist for my position. So I don't come here to defend the fat cat monopolists that Jamie rails against, and I think as anyone who defends dissent in America, I certainly am pleased and happy that there are folks like Jamie taking the positions that he does. That said, I'm very concerned about civil liberties in America. I'm very concerned about our First Amendment. Just before I came here, when I left home, I received a letter from the Southern Poverty Law Center asking me to contribute. It's a wonderful organization, I think one of the top organizations in this country that fights racism and bigotry, and I'm happy to continue to support it, and I urge you to support it. Why am I saying that? Money isn't speech, ladies and gentlemen, but money certainly facilitates speech, all right? I believe in this cause enough to put my money where my mouth is, and I urge you to do likewise. And that points to a very important issue, and that is, in a highly capitalistic culture, make of it what you will, all right? Money is very much a part of who we are and what we do. For my stake, I prefer the measure of free speech liberty we have in the United States over that of many socialist countries. Are there many things in those socialist countries that speak closer to my ideals? Certainly. But in terms of free speech liberty, I'm glad to be an American citizen, and I'm glad to receive the benefits of that. Let's talk a little bit about corporations. Jamie did an excellent job, I think, in describing Citizens United, and I agree with you, Jamie. The court should have disposed it on the grounds that Theodore Olson had argued. By the way, he's a conservative. He argued that, and his main argument was that this case should have been decided on statutory grounds. I won't get into the technicalities of it, but that's a fair point. I agree with that. And I think actually the Federal Elections Commission got it wrong in the first place. They should have allowed the documentary. After all, what we had was, I don't think, Jamie, you mentioned it, Citizens United is a non-profit corporation, just like the Thomas Jefferson Center, just like the American Civil Liberties Union, just as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, just as PETA is, just as the Sierra Club. Ladies and gentlemen, those are all corporations. So if you want to diminish or renege on the rights of corporations, think what that would do to Planned Parenthood in certain states in the Midwest if they could come after Planned Parenthood because Planned Parenthood as a corporate entity didn't have First Amendment protection. Now, I have a question for Jamie, if I may. Jamie is a senior fellow at People for the American Way, is that correct?
Yeah.
People for the American Way, like a lot of other nonprofits, receives a lot of money from corporate entities, including has received large amounts of money from the Soros Foundation. All right? I have no problem with that. That's fine. I wish People for the American Way had disclosed that on their website, but I researched it and was able to find it out nonetheless. And you might urge them to put those things, that sort of information on their website. I think transparency is a wonderful virtue. But so here's the scenario. Let's say that Ted Cruz, oy vey, and I'm not even Jewish, that's how bad it is. But all my friends and wife are, so. Anyway, let's say that Ted Cruz is the nominee for the Republicans, okay? And let's say that liberals like ourselves are just outraged by this. And let's say that People for the American Way, which receives money from the Soros Foundation, a corporation, and other corporations, profit and nonprofit, decides that they want to make a documentary critical of him, and they want to air it during the election, all right? Wonderful. I'm all for that. I give my money, just call me, tell them if they do that documentary, check with me, I'm there, my check is ready to go. Now, they want to air the documentary during the election, and they want something else. They want Jamie, and they're going to pay him for it, People for the American Way, I mean, these things take time. They want him to write a book, okay? Do you know that under the dissenting views in the very case that he criticized, the dissenting views, the case that he supported, People for the American Way, it would be a federal crime to air that documentary, and it would be a crime, as evidenced by the oral arguments, that both Kagan and the previous Assistant Solicitor General conceded during oral arguments with Justice Alito, and I have the transcript ready to read it if we have any doubts about it, conceded that a book could be regulated. To me, as someone who believes firmly in the First Amendment, ladies and gentlemen, this is a nightmare scenario. Regulating Planned Parenthood and depriving of it of its First Amendment and equal protection and due process rights is a nightmare. And that is part of why I don't come to defend the fat cats. What I'm saying is I'm worried, very worried, and I'll get to constitutional amendment later. Oy vey again. Our Bill of Rights has never been amended. How dare anyone even call for that? And I was behind Jamie the day he appeared in the Senate Judiciary Committee and did push for that and even push for more than what was being proposed. But we'll get to that in a moment. But this is my concern, that sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, the cure kills the patient. And that, as a liberal, as someone who defends civil liberties, I simply cannot abide.
Well, Jamie, I'm sure you don't have anything you want to say in response.
We still have about 40 minutes,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think...
I will take the easy task of just allowing you to respond to that.
Okay. All right, well, let's start with this, because we're being sponsored by the Thomas Jefferson Center, and we're here in beautiful Charlottesville. And Jefferson wrote in his famous letter to the Danbury Baptists that our First Amendment created a wall of separation between church and state. And of course, what's a church other than a religious corporation? That's what a church is. That created the model, the template for what progressives and populists and liberals tried to do a century ago, in the early 20th century, with the Tillman Act. And I'd be interested in Ron's position on the Tillman Act. The Tillman Act has been law since 1907, saying that corporations may not give money to federal candidates. Now, if corporation's just a person, and if taking the corporation's political free speech rights away would suddenly deprive all of us of our First Amendment rights, then the Tillman Act should be unconstitutional, and corporations should have the right to put money directly into federal campaigns. But for more than a century, we have banned that. We have tried to create a wall of separation in Jeffersonian terms between corporate treasury wealth and free democratic elections which belong to the people. That doesn't mean that corporate executives and employees and boards of directors can't vote, that they can't put their own money in. It means you can't take money out of the corporate treasury. Why? Well, Justice White and Chief Justice Rehnquist, just to give you a sense of how far right this court is, Rehnquist and White said in 1978 that a corporation's an artificial entity, as Chief Justice John Marshall had said, and it's endowed with all kinds of special privileges, limited liability of the shareholders, perpetual life of the company, favorable treatment of assets, and so on. And it's a fantastic vehicle for wealth maximization and accumulation and investment, as Rehnquist said, but it poses special dangers when it comes to the political process. In White's terms, the creature of the state could come to devour the state and come to control our politics. I mean, that's been a central understanding of American jurisprudence and democratic political struggle for at least a century. Now, Ron kind of taunts me with the idea, well, what about the 501c3 groups and the 501c4 groups, the nonprofits? If we don't overturn the Tillman Act, if we don't let the corporations all of a sudden after 2 centuries get directly involved in our politics, then People for the American Way and the NAACP and the National Right to Life group won't have political rights. But that's nonsense, because they've had political rights under this system. The real question goes in the reverse direction, which is if we actually say that the identity of the speaker is irrelevant, which is the heart of Justice Kennedy's opinion in Citizens United, it doesn't make any difference who the speaker is, then does that mean that churches can actually spend money in elections? That's the question I would pose to you, Ron. Can the Church of Latter-day Saints, can the Roman Catholic Church, can synagogues and so on take money out of their treasuries that is in there for religious purposes that people have given on a tax-deductible basis, and the churches themselves are tax exempt, and put it into politics because the identity of the speaker is irrelevant? Can foreign governments come and spend money, and foreign corporations come spend money in here? And if not, why not? If all speech is good, certainly those foreign governments, the Chinese government, I'm sure, would love to spend several $billions in our elections. Why not? If all speech is good and we don't care about the source or the origin of it. Look, the American people have this right. You know, Tom Paine, when he wrote Common Sense, knew what he was talking about. People understand that money is not speech. Money is a medium of exchange and currency. Sure, it can buy speech, but guess what? It can also buy power, and it can buy politicians. So if we don't allow the people to regulate it, money's going to wash away everything. And that's pretty much, what we are facing in a situation where the Supreme Court is dismantling the wall of separation between corporate treasury wealth and public elections. Now, one final point. Ron says, we could end up amending the Constitution to take someone's rights away. We've never amended the Bill of Rights before. I think that's wrong. When we abolished slavery, we confiscated millions and millions of dollars of what was considered property, and that's what the slave owners were arguing then. They said, you can't abolish slavery in the 13th Amendment, you're taking away our property rights. And when we adopted women's suffrage in the 19th Amendment in 1920, the men were saying, you are divesting us of our right to govern. And so you could say the same thing with the poll tax. In that case, Harper versus Virginia Board of Elections comes out of Virginia, $1.50, and the Supreme Court said you cannot charge people $1.50 to go and vote because some people have it and some people don't. And now we're opening the floodgates on corporate money to such an extent that the money of ordinary people is completely drowned out. And we're in danger of losing democratic equality. So those are the questions I would return serve to you about the 501c3 and C4. Should all the churches, should all the not-for-profits that get tax-exempt contributions get to participate however they want, spending money directly in politics? And by the way, the point about the book, which the right wing has used in a propaganda fashion, could you actually censor a book that a corporation put out and put at everybody's door telling to vote for the Koch brothers candidate or whatever, what have you? Well, let's say the government decided to endorse Barack Obama for president and publish a book and go door to door. Would you have any problem saying that the government printing office could not publish a book and go door to door with it? Would that not violate a whole set of rules which would be perfectly constitutional if the government actually decided to start endorsing candidates? So those are some of my questions I would throw back in your general direction.
I told you, we agree on a number of things. I only disagree with half of what you said. Okay, you mentioned giving money, taking money from foreign governments. Bad. Does the name Hillary Clinton mean anything to you? She has a foundation. Would you believe, according to the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, and I think those are relatively credible sources, that foundation is accepted? By the way, it changed its rules. Its rules were that it wouldn't accept money from foreign corporations. And then it changed its rules to accept $10 to $25 million from Saudi Arabia alone.
But her
That country.
campaign, should it go? That was my question.
Let me get to it.
Okay.
All right. So the foundation, and this kind of shows the slippery slope situation we have here. So the foundation has accepted huge amounts of money from foreign corporations, contrary to its original statement that it would not do so. Now, Hillary Clinton has not yet announced herself as a candidate, which means that the rules concerning campaign finance and what have you don't apply to her. And if you read the Washington Post and New York Times, you'll see that with increasing frequency, guess what? More and more candidates are waiting before they officially announce. Why? So they can accept more money that's not regulated by campaign finance laws. Now, getting back to your question, let's say that the Hillary Foundation decides Hillary has to speak in Ohio, all right? And she has to speak to some donors. Who does she ask? She asks herself. And has the foundation sponsored those flights? Yes. The question is when a country like Saudi Arabia gives your foundation $10 to $25 million, is that like the proverbial alligator in the bathtub that nobody notices? I mean, that somehow that this doesn't influence her at all? Now, I want to say a couple of things about these terrible folks who side with the idea that corporations are persons. You know, from 1976 to 2014, guess what group led the charge against campaign finance? Was it a Koch brothers group? Was it some right-wing group funded by fat cat conservatives? It was the American Civil Liberties Union. In 1976, the American Civil Liberties Union filed on behalf of the challenge to the Campaign Finance Act, and it challenged it on First Amendment grounds. And that continued and has continued up to this term. There's a case involving judicial elections and campaign contributions in the American Civil Liberties. Again, this year, 2014, filed a brief in that case on behalf of the views in defense of the First Amendment. Why? Let me take you back in time. The year is 1972, all right? There's a man in office named Richard Nixon. There's a lot of liberal groups that want him out of office. And they want to raise money to not only defeat him, but to impeach him. And the Nation and other groups, our people, I think I'm safe in saying that.
So
Our
your
people-
people or my people? We're the
Our people, the Nation magazine. I mean, our people.
no red states, no blue states, just the United
Okay,
States.
all right. So anyway, they want to impeach him. And so they raise some money, and they want to take out a full-page ad in the New York Times. Basically, articles of impeachment, pretty much like what you'd find when they attempted to impeach Andrew Johnson. The New York Times will not run the ad. Why? Because it's afraid that the Nixon administration, the Justice Department, will come after it for violation of the campaign finance laws. The ACLU tries again and is threatened by the Justice Department that if they proceed, they may well be in violation of the campaign finance laws. And so they go to court, all right? And in two cases, they prevailed. Those cases didn't go to the Supreme Court, but they prevailed. One other thing, when this all started in the case of Buckley versus Vallejo, folks on my side of the divide always forget to say who is the co-plaintiff or the co-petitioner in that case, all right? And let me tell you what a big, bad conservative he was. It was Eugene McCarthy, all right? And why? All right, why was this left, very left, a real liberal, not like the kind of liberals today, I mean a real bona fide liberal, right? Why? Because he realized that the status quo defended the incumbent, all right? So my point in all of this is to tell you, all right, if you think that this is something that just benefits conservatives and kills liberals and kills our democracy, all right, think again, take a few lessons from history. This is not to say that there's nothing we can do, all right? I do think there are things we can do, but I don't want to tinker with the First Amendment, and I don't want to amend our Constitution. More on that in a moment.
Can I just make one quick point? But I appreciate very much the story, but I thought that you were advancing or endorsing the general proposition that the money is speech side is making, which is essentially that money is speech, more speech is better, therefore we have to completely deregulate money. I didn't hear your position, for example, on the
I don't
Tillman
agree
Act.
with that. I don't. So the position you just said, I don't
Okay,
I
well
don't agree with
then,
that
I would
position.
be interested if the logic of your position is that the Saudi government should be able to put money directly in Hillary Clinton's campaign coffers or some other candidate.
I don't, in fact, right now, current First Amendment law doesn't allows us to prohibit that. So
But what's
I
your
think-
position on that? Because I think
I
that-
agree. I
Yeah.
think that.
Why is that?
Why do I think?
Yeah, I mean, in other words, it's just more speech.
No, well-
Or to
well, first
criminal
of all-
money, for example.
first of all-
Children's money. The Federal Election Commission says that 3- and 4-year-olds can't give because what's happening is the parents are just using the kids as a conduit, right? But that's just more speech, and you would be depriving of the toddlers of their right to participate in politics because of the identity of the speaker, because they're 3 years old. What's wrong with that?
Foreign corporations do not stand in the same position as do citizens.
Right, and neither do corporate. For one thing, there's really no difference between foreign and domestic corporations because anybody can purchase a corporation here, right? At what point do you think, how much ownership has to be foreign before it loses its First Amendment rights in your view?
I haven't thought about that. I'd have to, let me
Because
put it this way. Let
We
me
have
answer
grappled with what a
this.
corporation is.
Let me-
and, you know,
let me-
and I think a corporation is not a person, and it's not an assemblage of persons. It's an ownership structure for investment of money. And so the philosophers call this a category error. What the court did in Citizens United, they just made a mistake.
So by that logic, then, since Hillary Clinton's foundation accepts, and this is your chance to speak out against her. So since you're since you're running for office,
I might run for Congress. I'm not speaking out against anybody. No, Hillary Clinton.
Isn't this what it comes to? I mean, this is the problem we face. I think just a couple.
okay.
Well,
I
I think the mic's mine now.
Go for it.
I think this is part of the problem. I mean, in the scenario that he just described, that meant that the government can completely shut down Hillary Clinton's foundation. I mean, they could. They're accepting, they're sucking off the tit of foreign governments. They can do it. What I want to know is this, okay? I mean, let's just kind of cut to the chase. He's running for election, or he may be running for election. Let's say that. He may be. Right now, he's one of the representatives in the state of Maryland, which is where I live, though I work in the University of Washington in Seattle. But, long story. You ever thought about we're both at Washington law schools?
Yeah.
Anyway, but here's the point. Jamie may be running for office, and he may be running in my district. And if he does, I want some answers to questions right now. So I should decide should you announce whether or not I should vote for you and hold a party for you as we did for Heather Mazur. All right, Heather Mazur, a progressive, wonderful lady that ran for governor in the state of Maryland. Unfortunately, she didn't win. So here's some of my questions. You may want to just jot them down so we can get them. So those of us who want to support your campaign can do so and do so vigorously. When Heather ran, there was a party thrown for her by somebody who was like insanely rich, and at a mansion, and hundreds of people came, and you had to be there. It was wine, hors d'oeuvres, I mean, just wonderful feed, and people were cutting checks with zeros nonstop. Okay, so the first question is, if somebody, all right, like that, some big fat cat were to throw a party for you and fundraiser, would you allow it? Second question, union support, all right? Guess what the greatest source of outside income in the gubernatorial election, last gubernatorial election in New Jersey was? The greatest source of outside income, unions, all right? Will you accept, unlimited union support? Not only money, but, all sorts of in-kind contributions. if I want to put up 5 billboards, third question, 5 billboards supporting your campaign, will you discourage me from doing that? Also, if, oh, here's a good one, As you know, Jeff Curzon, I don't know if you know him, a great guy, a great progressive, he was involved in the Obama campaign. This guy alone raised $150,000 in just like a month for Obama. It was pretty good. But anyway, he ran for Congress in New York, and he made what I thought was a wonderful pledge. He pledged to accept no PAC money. Jamie, will you accept PAC money? And finally, well, why don't I will just leave it there. So I want to be an informed citizen. I want to be an informed citizen, and I want to know how vigorously I can support your campaign. So help me.
Well, you're going to be very angry at me because I'm not right now going to give you a chance to answer Ron's question specifically. Well, we'll have plenty of time.
I'm being chilled.
But we're getting into...
You're being chilled. You got to ask your questions.
On your behalf. I'm being chilled on your behalf.
It's going to look like I'm dodging his questions.
But I think
those were softballs.
I think we're getting into the weeds of it, which is good.
Well,
I think that demonstrates...
Hold on,
let me ask a question. And I think that demonstrates Ron's point that this is much more complicated than opposite sides like to pretend it is. People on different sides of the issues. But let's talk about remedies, because one thing I am hearing from both of you is an agreement that there is a problem with money in our campaigns, in our federal elections. I think am I correct in saying you're both?
Yes.
So let's think about what are possible solutions. One possible solution, of course, is amending the First Amendment. And the First Amendment, or by court decision. As we all know, the First Amendment is not absolute. There are exceptions to First Amendment protection. Why isn't the problem of money in our election campaigns such a problem to our society and our way of governance that maybe an amendment to the First Amendment on campaign finance is simply...
Well, let's go to some practical solutions, okay? Because as you know, it takes 2/3 vote in the House and the Senate and 3/4 of the states to ratify a constitutional amendment. And at a certain point, the problem kills the solution. I mean, there's just too much money, despite the fact that we had a party line vote in the Senate to amend the Constitution. But let's start with this. I support the ACLU's position, which is public financing of elections. And I have been a champion of public financing in Maryland. And this is clearly the way to marginalize the tyranny of big money, which is you create a matching system like they've got in New York City. I see my friend Zephyr Teachout is here from New York, and that has become a model for how you do it across the country. My friend Congressman John Sarbanes has a proposal in Congress today to create a matching system where people would be able to raise money from small donors, not big, small donors, and get it matched through a public contribution. That's clearly the way to go. Let me just say on the ACLU, I yield to no one, even my great friend Ron, in terms of my championship of civil liberties and civil rights. I got an award just a few years ago from the ACLU for standing up for marriage equality, for fighting police spying, for championing the Second Chance Act, which we just passed this week in Maryland in the Senate. And so I'm a huge champion of civil liberties. And of course, as you know, there's a big split within the ACLU about this. When I testified before the United States Senate Judiciary Committee, I brought with me a letter from more than a dozen former executive directors and chairs of the ACLU saying that they thought that the dominant position veered from the union of democracy and civil liberties, which the ACLU always stood for. Now, let me try to address some of the other things and get at your question. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and I think it's fine. I welcome Ron's challenge, the existential question, which is what do you do when you try to get into politics to fight for things you believe in and you're in the middle of a money system, a wealth primary? How do you deal with it? Well, the first thing I did when I announced is I said I was not going to take money from corporations, partnerships, LLCs, people lobbying me and so on. Now, of course, none of those people wanted to give me any money anyway. So it was an easy pledge for me to make, you know. But I have stood by that, and it has given me the power and the independence to take strong positions that are against the current, okay? And if you don't think that money, sometimes I hear these members of Congress saying, well, the money doesn't make any difference. Who's spending the money and who's lobbying? And they say, it's irrelevant. If you don't think money makes a difference in politics, you're too innocent to be let out of the house by yourself, okay? It makes a huge difference in terms of what goes on the agenda and what's happening in the big news, and more importantly, what's happening in the back rooms when the deals are being cut and the tax laws are being written and so on. Okay, now, so Ron asks me, well, so what do you do? Would I not accept a big fundraiser? Would I not accept his generosity in opening up his home? I think I heard him offer to have a fundraiser with me. And the answer is that the position that I have taken is that the Supreme Court has derailed the democratic experiment with Citizens United in saying that corporations can take money out of their treasury and pump it into political campaigns. And that's a whole different kind of scale of money that threatens a scale of corruption that we've never seen before in American politics. So do I accept money from wealthy people? Yes, I do. Most of my money comes from middle class and working class people like the people I represent. I live on the other side of the tracks in Montgomery County from where I think Ron lives. But I'm going to get to know his side of the county. And if he's got a living room big enough for the people in this room, I would love to do it. Let me just say something about unions, okay? And the Supreme Court and Congress both have collaborated in a basic fallacy in equating corporations and unions. A union is a membership organization. Its money comes from its members putting money in. A corporation, ExxonMobil, gets money from the consumers because they're selling a good or a service or a product. So again, it's a category error to say that corporations should be able to take money out of the treasury, like McDonald's can spend money promoting its environmental or animal agenda or whatever it might be because somebody bought a Big Mac or French fries there, as opposed to a union where people join. Now, not only that, the Supreme Court has said repeatedly, if you're forced to join a union or to pay so-called agency dues, you get a rebate for any political expenditures that you disagree with, precisely because we don't want your agency fees or dues going to a political cause or candidate that you disagree with. And, the Supreme Court has stated that several times. So do I accept PAC money? Sure, I accept PAC money because that's money that individuals put in. But I will not, in fact, I say I will save the corporations of Maryland, America, millions or tens of millions of dollars by not accepting their money. I don't think that the money should be taken out of the Treasury and put in for political purposes. And by the way, if you own a pension fund, how many people here are part of a pension fund that is invested in the stock market? If you're invested that way, then some of your money from these big companies is going into political campaigns, federal, state, in some cases local campaigns, without your knowledge, without your consent. And I introduced legislation in Maryland called Shareholders United, which picks up on a line from Justice Kennedy in the majority decision in Citizens United, where he said the shareholders can use the mechanism of shareholder democracy if they disagree. And of course, they'll know about it because we can do online disclosure. None of that's reality, but it makes sense in theory. So my legislation, which a number of state legislatures are taking up now, says that one, corporations that spend in politics have got to tell the shareholders within 48 hours of doing it. But two, they can't spend it all without getting a prior majority vote of the shareholders on an annual basis. They don't have to approve each individual expenditure, but they've got to have a vote saying, we approve the political budget. That's the way they do it in the United Kingdom, where they've had corporate expenditures for many years. So if we're going down this road, at least the shareholders should have some voice in it.
Ron,
And
I'm going to let Ron respond, and then I'm going to go to questions from the audience.
defending the forces of evil.
Yeah.
I want you to know, one of my criticisms of my progressive colleagues is that, nobody really takes up the hard question. What can we do about this? By the way, I didn't know that Professor Teachat was in the room, and this book, Corruption in America, is a wonderful book. Do I agree with everything in it? I don't think I agree with everything in any book, including my own books. But it's a very good book, and I recommend it to you. Getting back to the evil forces and defending them. So, by the way, I do endorse the kind of proposed legislation, and I think that's a really good thing. And I think more progressives need to do precisely the thing that it's not as sexy, it doesn't get as big headlines, but I think it's an important contribution. I was in the Senate chamber the day that the testimony was taken on amending or Bill of Rights. And just so we're right on nuance here, the First Amendment, going back to 1791, has never been amended, and that is accurate to the T, and I don't think it should be, and that liberals of all people should lend their name, even if they don't think it can pass, to tinkering with the First Amendment and to amending it. I say to you, it sets a bad precedent. I sat behind Jamie the day he testified. I thought he said many good things. But as someone who has committed my life to, among other things, defending the First Amendment, my wife works on reproductive rights with the Guttmacher Institute, and I think it's a wonderful cause, and I support that too. But I don't want to amend the Equal Protection Clause, and I don't want to amend the First Amendment. One of the groups that has led the charge and has done just a wonderful job in calling for campaign finance reform and just pointing out to a lot of the corruption that Professor Teachout mentions in his book, is a group called Democracy 21. And going back decades, there's an individual named Fred Wertheimer who has conducted, I think, a very honorable charge. Do I always agree with Fred on a number of things? No, I don't. But if one's to be fair, I think he's led a wonderful campaign along with Democracy 21. But guess what? Guess what group, when it came to lending their name to this proposal that Jamie defended to amend the Constitution, guess which group remained loudly silent? Democracy 21. And I asked Fred point blank, would you support a constitutional amendment? No. I think, if you think about it, why does a group that has committed itself so robustly, all right, to defending the cause of campaign finance, why does that group, when others, including People for the American Way, all right, including a number of unions, right? Why does it silence itself? Why? And I submit to you, for the same reason that liberals like myself and other folks have pause when we hear about some of the proposed remedies which we think could cure a problem so great that it would kill many of the liberties that we take. I don't want the government, all right, engaged in a campaign to abridge my free speech or those of people like the American Civil Liberties Union in the 70s when the Nixon administration wanted to come after them. So, is there a difference of view between us? Certainly. But I think it's a difference along a spectrum. And I think if anything comes of this dialogue today, what's important is that folks like us, liberals like us, all right, need to find some way that the kinds of evils which Jamie rails against, we can do something effective, not a constitutional amendment which isn't going anywhere and sets a bad precedent, but something that would really change and might begin to make a difference. And in that regard, you have a commonality of interest and a meeting of minds in the proposal that Jamie has recommended. And I think, if anything, we need more of that. And Jamie, I'm welcome. I invite the opportunity to work with you and fellow liberals to that end.
Great. Well, I appreciate that.
Can I
very much?
Apparently I have lied to you because I said I was going to let you have the opportunity to ask a lot of questions. But I hope you feel that the sacrifice was not a vain one, given this conversation seems to have been, it's just been terrific and engaging. But I hate to cut it off, but I do want to give you the opportunity to ask some questions. So this gentleman right here.
Hi, thanks. Kurt Walters. I've worked on some money and politics reform for quite some time. And so the question I wanted to ask has to do with the dangers that you, as you term it, of regulating speech. And so we're standing in the halls of the City Hall here in Charlottesville. And at the regular meetings, citizens can come up, they can speak their mind, and they're limited to 3 minutes. I think we'd all agree that that is consistent with the First Amendment. We'd all agree it's a regulation of speech. If this were more like the election system, the rich might be able to speak for 15 minutes, the less rich maybe for 15 seconds. So do you think that the regulation of speech in this chamber is dangerous, and what's the difference with elections?
In the First Amendment doctrine, we have something called time, place, manner. That's my answer.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's an excellent question, of course. I mean, within the government, speech is intensely regulated, of course. I mean, in the House of Representatives, you get 1 minute to make a speech. The time is rigorously divided between the two sides. In the Supreme Court, where so many of our First Amendment liberties have been fought, challenged, and expounded, finally, a rigorous allotment of speech time with reservation of time for a rebuttal and so on. Now, I believe in a much freer exchange out in public. The irony is that the same Supreme Court, which gave us Citizens United, has been thwarting and attacking free speech. So I reject any insinuation that this is a pro-free speech court. If you look at any of the other decisions with respect to public employees' rights, the rights of high school students, the rights of union members, this court has been savaging people's real free speech rights, the opportunity to speak. It's only in the context of money speech that they have said somehow, you know, it's unlimited and opens the door possibly to criminal proceeds coming in, foreign government money, and so on the theory that the identity of the speaker is irrelevant. So what do we do about the specific time, place, and manner, and Ron's right to raise it, the time, place, manner of an election? And I think there what we say is that there are reasonable rules that can be put in place so that the election makes sense and so that everybody's voice can be spoken, and that was well understood. This court has moved in the other direction. For example, in the Arizona case that came the year after Citizens United, the court struck down, the same 5-justice conservative majority struck down a public financing mechanism in Arizona, which said if you get public financing and your opponent outspends you 3-1 or 4-1, we will give you a little extra money in order to create more speech. And the court said that chills the free speech rights of the wealthy speaker, which totally undercuts their argument that all they want is more speech, because Arizona was trying to promote more speech, and instead they said that violated the First Amendment rights of the well-endowed, well-bankrolled candidate, which shows they're not interested in more speech. They're interested in freezing the political inequality that some people have over others.
In the interest of time, I will not take the time to dissent with the mischaracterization of the Roberts Court record. I mean, you did point out a few cases. I don't have any disagreement there, but to characterize the Robert Court First Amendment jurisprudence as Jamie has, ladies and gentlemen, is not quite accurate, and so we'll save that in the interest of time for another day.
Yes, right here, ma'am.
Thank you both for this very lively exchange. This is a specific question for Jamie. During the Citizens United case, did any of the justices argue for Justice Marshall's definition of a corporation? And if so, how did those arguments go?
It was central to the dissenting opinions in the case. And Sotomayor was terrific on this, and Kagan was terrific on this. And they said, look, for the first time in American history, you're taking for-profit business corporations and you're treating them either like citizens or like groups of citizens. And that's not what they are. That's not the way they've ever been treated in law. And again, that was a conservative dictum for a very long time. I mean, Chief Justice Rehnquist was emphatic about that point, that there is this wall of separation between corporate treasury wealth and public elections. The problem is that it's not constitutional, unlike the First Amendment separation of church and state. We've tried to build it up in statute, beginning with the Tillman Act, and the Supreme Court is bulldozing the wall of separation between corporate treasury wealth and public elections. And somehow, whether it's constitutional, and I don't fetishize that in any way, I don't take any joy in it. People talk about a runaway constitutional convention. Today we've got a runaway Supreme Court, which is totally divorced from the way that the rest of the public understands politics and understands corruption, as elucidated by Professor Teachout in her book. So somehow we need to reclaim it, and if we can do it at the state level, let's do it at the state level. If we've got to do it constitutionally, let's do it. Since the Bill of Rights, we've only amended the Constitution 17 times. If you take away prohibition and the repeal of it, only 15 times. The vast majority of those amendments have been suffrage expanding, democracy enlarging, democracy deepening amendments, like women's suffrage, like the 15th Amendment banning race discrimination in voting, like the 24th Amendment banning poll taxes, the 26th Amendment lowering the voting age to 18. This is completely within the mainstream of American constitutional development, to have the people take back democracy. The Declaration of Independence was all about the consent of the governed. The first three words of the Constitution are "we the people," and it was our last great Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, who spoke of government of the people, by the people, and for the people, right?
Can I just say something about Abraham Lincoln?
Yeah.
I was so glad you mentioned Honest Abe. As you know, undoubtedly from reading When Money Speaks, and it was one of the delightful things that came across when we were researching the book, when he was running in Illinois for Congress, there was a very influential German constituency, and they were supporting his opponent. So what did Abe do? He bought the German newspaper. And what did he tell the editor of the German newspaper to do? Well, guess how the editorials changed thereafter. By the way, one last thing, since another word, more information brought to you from the dark side, if you will. But the other thing I wanted to mention it earlier, since we were talking about the evil Roberts Court, and believe me, I want to spare no adjectives, problems I have with them, although I'm hoping they're going to come out right on gay marriage. But Justice Brennan and Justice Marshall, this all started with a case called Buckley versus Vallejo, and Justice Brennan played a major role in writing that decision, and Justice Marshall signed on to that. And as late as 1986, Justice Brennan had struck down on First Amendment grounds campaign finance law and defended the rights of corporations. Now, it's all well and fine to say Roberts and Alito and these guys are terrible and bad and what have you, all right? But there are people from our side of the divide, Brennan and Marshall, all right, who also lend their names to it. And any statement to the contrary that Justice Brennan changed his view has never been documented and is not in the biography written about him. So as far as we know, Brennan never changed his view on this. And it is quite ironic that an entity that does all sorts of fine work, the Brennan Center, is named after him and championing a cause very much at odds with what Justice Brennan did in Buckley versus Vallejo.
Can I just say a word for my friends at the Brennan Center and my colleague Steve Vermeil, who wrote the biography that you're referring to. Buckley versus Vallejo was about individual rights of spending. It upheld reasonable campaign contribution limits. It upheld public financing, and so that is
struck down expenditures. Don't forget that.
No, of course not. But it's light years away from what we're seeing in the Roberts Court.
Do you agree with Buckley versus Vallejo?
Buckley versus Vallejo is fine. Are you kidding? Compared to what we've got in Citizens
Do you agree
United?
with it? You thought the court had it right?
As you know, there's about 15 different holdings in there, but I basically agree with the decision. And there's a lot going on in that opinion. But compared to what we've seen in Citizens United.
By the way, Citizens United was not the first case.
Okay.
Citizens United was not the first case to hold that corporations have First Amendment rights. I mean, my God, as
Political
Jamie
free
knows,
speech rights.
as he knows, that.
Somewhat ironically, I'm going to cut the conversation off. I apologize that we weren't able to get as many questions from the audience, but I think you'll agree that it was worth it. What a great conversation.